So now let's do some not so naive. Right? Let's do some like not so naive views of immigration. And so here, what we're going to talk about are sort of the what we could call the gainers and the what we could call the losers, or the people who lose from immigration. And so in this model, what we have are immigrant workers displacing some American workers from one industry. And so here, what we're basically saying is that if we increase immigration, there are some Americans who will lose their jobs, right? And that's true. And nothing I've said disputes that or disagrees with that statement whatsoever. Okay? And so here, what we've got is an increase in labor supply and a decrease. Okay, so let's just draw it, right? We can say here's supply and demand. Okay, and let's use red to illustrate the increased supply of immigrants. Or let's be consistent with the notes. We'll use blue. Okay, so we got blue. Okay, so blue, which I don't know if you can see the difference. Yeah, it looks like you can. Okay, so what happens, right? The wage used to be here, and now it is down there. Okay, and so what we have, right, is a decrease in wages, which could drive some American workers out of that industry, or the Americans that remain in that industry will just get fewer dollars as their wage. Okay, but it would be, and that's true, and those people are harmed. I'm not disputing that, but it would be a mistake to automatically. Right, and I say automatically. I want to put an emphasis on that. Right, it would be a mistake to automatically conclude that Americans as a whole are harmed by this. Okay, so for one, consumers benefit in the form of cheaper labor, from the cheaper labor in the form of lower prices for goods and services. And so, given that the vast majority of Americans do not work in any one particular industry, this means that if we look at just the effects on one industry at a time, more Americans benefit in the form of lower prices than are harmed by lower wages. Similarly, employers are also benefited by this as they increase the profitability of their business and reduce the total wage bill. Okay, so we've got two different groups of people in America that are benefited by this. Obviously, the owners of the employers are benefited because they save money on wages, but American consumers are also made better off from immigration based on the fact that the lower labor costs reduce the cost of the final product. Okay, but what about employees in the industry affected by the immigrant workers? Are they on net benefited or harmed? Well, so it turns out this question is less clear than we would initially think. And so let's suppose that the labor demand curve is very elastic. Okay, so we'll just make it elastic. Cool, done. All right, wage and quantity. Okay. So in this scenario, even a large increase in the supply of labor, all right, so if we go from here to here, right, even a huge increase is not going to decrease people's wages by hardly anything at all. Okay, and so only modest effects on the wages. So if the labor demand curve is very elastic, right, there will be only very modest effects on the wages that Americans are paid based on the immigrants coming in, okay, based on the supply of labor increase due to the immigrants. Okay, but what it could also do is increase the demand for final goods and services produced in the U.S. owing to the increased number of consumers, right? And so when we have more consumers in a country, so let's just illustrate the small change in labor demand, or I'm sorry, in wage. Right, you guys might not even be able to see the difference. You can. Right, so very, very tiny decrease in wages, okay? But because we now have more people in the country, we have more consumers in the country. And so if what that could do, because we have more consumers, we could easily have it be the case that the demand for that product increases because of the increased number of customers or consumers, okay? And if the demand for that product increases, then the demand for labor might increase. Okay, and so what we could have is a situation where the total effect is to actually get a raise from immigration, right? And so, I drew a much better or better drawing of this in the notes in Microsoft Paint, which is a crude program, but it worked for my purposes, right? And so what we could easily see, right, is a situation where the demand for the product increases by enough to increase the labor demand for the workers in that industry, such that everyone actually ends up getting a raise. So this could happen. There's nothing that says this cannot happen, right? We could also have a situation where where this increase in the demand for the product isn't big enough to get them a raise in their salaries, right? So if you look at the notes, I drew two sets of graphs, one of which has increased wages. I'm looking at pages 9 and 10, at the top of page 10. Right? If you look at those, you'll see that it could easily be the case either way. There's nothing a priori that says wages are going to decrease or that wages are going to increase. It could be either one. Okay, and so really, the case that that even domestic workers lose based on immigration is not as obvious as people who are against immigration would have you believe. Okay, and again, I'm not saying I'm pro or against immigration. All I'm saying is that the actual economics of this are not as clear as many people seem to actually think. And so I call this the not so naive view because it actually takes into account the economic effects. Okay, so if your goal as a person who designs policy or as a union rep or anything like that, if your goal is to increase wages for your workers, right, or for the people in general, it's not necessarily the case that you should ban immigrants. It might be, if this is true, right, if this is all true, it might be the case that actually letting immigrants in will lead to higher wages, right? And also, by the way, lower prices for things, right? And so if that's true, then having immigrants come into the country actually accomplishes your goal of making people wealthier, both in terms of monetary terms and in terms of like what they can actually afford. So really, this is the not so naive view because it's not taking sort of the a priori or the this is the truth, and it's always and everywhere true that these naive views are taking. Okay, so that's really what it is. It's not so. It is about taking into account economics, but it's not just saying like, oh, economics is true. It's just saying, you know what, the context matters. It could be either way, and it depends on these things here. Okay.